LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 6th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mix-Up. Thanks for joining me. It's a tough day already, I see, but I will be using the 13 best, most newsworthy clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for which it'd be a really educational, informative, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic, as you can see from the title of the video, is will Supreme Court take away right to choose, overturn Roe v. Wade? And that is the main topic, and I'll use my background in, as a lawyer and having some knowledge of constitutional law to explain where the right to reproductive choice comes from in the Constitution. If I give out these U.S. constitutions, so get your constitution ready because I will talk about it. And I'll also have some focus on COVID, the Delta wave that's still happening in the United States, and the possible Omicron wave that could be coming, because that was also a main topic of the Sunday shows. Well, I guess Fox News actually focused on the Russian threat to the Ukraine for some reason. Well, they were trying to focus on national security because they were coming from this defense seminar at the Reagan Library that you'll see Chris Wallace talk about. But I will have this Fox News pundit discussion about the Supreme Court likely overturning Roe v. Wade. And even this Fox News interview, the final clip I'm going to show you is from Chris Wallace's interview of this general in Space Force. And it's actually going to win Chris Wallace the Forgot to Listen to the Answer award of the week for being a bad interviewer and not following up on a discrepancy in somebody's answer. Meanwhile, CBS News' Face the Nation actually didn't mention abortion once during the entire program. They almost exclusively focused on COVID. And actually, COVID is the topic. It's a secondary topic that I'll have a few clips on, including from CBS News' Face the Nation, where I'll have a clip of Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy talking about travel bans and whether Americans should be getting boosters before a lot of people in the world get their first shot. And so I'll get to that, but I'm also going to use COVID as the source of my political comedy clips this week. It's kind of dark comedy, as you might expect from a disease that's killed millions worldwide and almost 800,000 here in the United States now. And so this starts with a discussion on MSNBC's Morning Joe last Friday of the most recent crazy remarks from Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin that exemplify what I was talking about last week about this hatred on the right of Dr. Anthony Fauci, that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Republican Senator Ron Johnson is criticizing Dr. Anthony Fauci's response to the virus. Here's what he said yesterday during an interview on the Brian Kilmeade show.
As viruses evolve, they become more contagious because they want to replicate, but they also become less lethal because killing your host doesn't help you replicate very well. So again, that's sort of the general tendency of viruses. So why would we expect anything different with the coronavirus, except for you want to create a state of fear, to keep us in the state of fear, to maintain the controls, and that's what you're seeing here in the United States. I mean, by the way, Fauci did the exact same thing with AIDS. He overhyped it. He created all kinds of fear, saying it could affect the entire population when it couldn't. And he's using the exact same playbook for COVID, ignoring therapy, pushing a vaccine. The solution to this, I've always felt, was early treatment. We still haven't robustly explored that, and that's a travesty.
It's just, speaking of a travesty. Willie, do you want to even go there with AIDS?
Overhyped AIDS?
Overhyped AIDS. Ron Johnson says he overhyped AIDS.
Senator Johnson ever read a book or traveled to Africa or maybe lived around New York City in the 1980s? I suspect none of those. But my God, the lengths these people go. Now, in the case of Ron Johnson, we've heard, and mostly from his colleagues, there are some limits there. So maybe he really doesn't understand this?
You mean because of the rocks that he was born with in his head?
Well, that's what some of his colleagues will tell you privately.
That's what they tell us.
There are limits.
I don't know. I haven't seen a brain scan.
Maybe
I don't
clinical
know
limits.
that there are rocks in his head. I just know that his Republican colleagues say.
That's what they say.
If he moves really fast to the right or the left, you can hear it. You hear it, right. And I haven't heard it, so I'm not suggesting that's the case. But
So
I don't know if you watch Morning Joe. I actually often wake up in the middle of the night or wake up early or whatever, and I will watch a lot of Morning Joe. Even though Joe Scarborough is a Republican and not really my favorite. I don't know. They get some good guests on there. I think I've said this before. I think the best thing I can say about Joe Scarborough is sometimes he's sufferable. If you think about the adjective insufferable, which he often is, and I don't know, he kind of borderlines with his whole like beating the rocks in the head thing into the ground with when he moves real fast, you can hear it, but I don't know. That's what they say, but that is at least well-deserved mockery of Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. I'm old enough to remember the AIDS epidemic and how Anthony Fauci got the Medal of Freedom from George, was it H.W. Bush, for his fight against AIDS? I think that might be in one of these clips I'm showing, but or maybe it was in part I cut out. But to add to the political comedy that Joe Scarborough's borderline insufferable attempt to make a joke there. I actually find the back and forth between Dr. Anthony Fauci and Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union a little bit more humorous, especially Jake Tapper's comment at the end when he asks Anthony Fauci about Ron Johnson of Wisconsin's remarks over in this clip.
Evaluating that policy.
Republican Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin said this week that you've been using coronavirus to keep Americans in fear and maintain control. Take a listen.
Fauci did the exact same thing with AIDS. He overhyped it. He created all kinds of fear, saying it could affect the entire population when it couldn't. And he's using the exact same playbook for COVID.
Obviously, that's a bizarre and false assertion. President George W. Bush gave you the Presidential Medal of Freedom because of your leadership in the AIDS crisis, but I did want to give you an opportunity to respond.
Jake, how do you respond to something as preposterous as that? Overhyping AIDS, it's killed over 750,000 Americans and 36 million people worldwide. How do you overhype that? Overhyping COVID, it's already killed 780,000 Americans and over 5 million people worldwide. So I don't have any clue of what he's talking about.
I don't think he does either. Dr. Anthony Fauci, thank you so much. Appreciate it. The future.
I don't think he does either. That was just like a perfect Jake Tapper there. And what is the problem with Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin? I don't know. But I guess we can at least be grateful that he created this political comedy out of a pandemic that has killed, like I was saying, over 800 or almost 800,000 Americans and millions worldwide, and is apparently not over yet. And I'll talk about that more when I show some of the news summaries that focus on COVID. And actually, the first news summary I'm going to show you, this next clip, is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos news summary that does focus on COVID. And tells you that there's a problem with this new Omicron variant, and talks about Biden's plan in response. But what is really interesting about this clip, I start every program talking about the so-called corporate media, but they're not. I mean, they are owned by large corporations, and they want to give you the point of view of the large corporation. And I've never seen, or I don't know if I've never seen it, but this is like pretty brazen, where it's like an inside exclusive look at the point of view of Moderna. And it's like, but it's balanced because they give they give conflicting views of two different people from the Moderna Corporation. And anyway, I don't want to overly pre-criticize the clip, but this is, like I said, some of the news summaries focus on abortion, some of them focus on COVID, some focus on both, and then Fox News focuses on the Russian threat to Ukraine for, you can decide which of those topics should best be featured at the beginning of the weekly news program as the most important story. But I'll talk more about how ABC approached the ABC and the CBS are fairly similar, and I'll start with ABC, and NBC's in the middle between the two. Chuck Todd sandwiched in between Martha Raddatz and Margaret Brennan, so you can keep that image in your mind while you watch the first news summary with me over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. Just 11 days have passed since South Africa first reported the Omicron variant to the World Health Organization, raising global concerns and renewed uncertainty about the future of the pandemic. Since then, just look at this map. Omicron has reached at least 40 countries around the world in every major continent. Here in the U.S., after the first case was discovered Wednesday in California, at least 15 other states from New York to Hawaii have now detected the new variant. President Biden laid out his initial plan to combat Omicron on Thursday, increasing access to boosters, making available free at-home COVID tests, and strengthening testing requirements for international travelers. We'll discuss the strategy with CDC Director Rochelle Walensky in just a moment, but first, our exclusive look inside Moderna headquarters, where they are already working on a new vaccine to fight Omicron as the threat from the variant grows. 2 years into a global pandemic, when things were starting to look up, a new worrisome variant, Omicron.
If you're worried about Omicron variant, the best thing to do is get fully vaccinated and then get your booster shot.
The reaction was swift. In just one day this week, more than 2.2 million vaccine doses administered, the highest single-day number in more than 7 months. The president of pharmaceutical giant Moderna, who spoke to us at the Cambridge, Massachusetts headquarters, says the makeup of the Omicron variant has the potential for a worst-case scenario. What did you think when you first saw this variant? Did you just think, oh no, here we go again?
There was literally a list of 8 or 10 mutations that we never wanted to see show up in one variant of concern. And we opened this one up, and all but one of them was there. And the instant feeling was, oh, this isn't going to be good.
But the big question, just how much protection will the existing vaccines and boosters have against the new variant? The CEO of Moderna, Stéphane Bancel, roiled markets this week by predicting a significant drop in vaccine efficacy, saying there was, quote, no world in which vaccine effectiveness doesn't drop against the new variant. Do you agree?
Well, I probably would have used different words, but I think the short answer is we don't have data yet to know for sure.
You said you would use different words than your CEO used. What words would you use?
Well, I think that there's a real risk that we're going to see a decrease in effectiveness of the vaccines. What I don't know is how substantial that is. Is it going to be the kind of thing that we saw with the Delta variant, which is ultimately the vaccines were still effective? Or are we going to see something more like a 50% decrease in efficacy, which would really mean we probably need to reboot the vaccines and update them?
Moderna scientists are not waiting the expected 2 to 3 weeks to find out. We traveled to the research lab and got a rare look inside, where Moderna says it could quickly create another shot specifically tailored to protect against Omicron.
Approximately 70% of the U.S. supply comes out of this facility.
Matt Barrows is Moderna's senior director of manufacturing. He says if necessary, their facilities are ready to mass produce the current vaccines and a new one simultaneously. Do you have the facilities to do both and do them rapidly?
We do have the capacity to do both and do them fast.
But Dr. Hogue warns it would still be a waiting game.
We could probably produce tens of millions of doses in the first quarter, but not hundreds. And it really wouldn't be until the second quarter of next year that you'd be seeing those big step changes in terms of the number of doses made.
Just miles away from Moderna headquarters in Everett, Massachusetts, emergency room physician Aaron Beaumont is already seeing a winter surge and is bracing for Omicron.
I think we just don't have enough data yet, but I am a little bit worried.
You don't want to go through this again.
No, I don't want to go through that again. I was just reflecting back to what it was like in March and April of 2020, and that was a dark time.
A time when Dr. Beaumont was giving us regular, disturbing updates.
Once we do get our surge, I don't know where we're going to put these people. I think we've come a long way in terms of having vaccines and in knowing how to treat this disease. But yeah, I don't think any of us want to go back there.
Dr. Hogue says despite the uncertainty about Omicron, he is still hopeful that the finish line is in sight.
We really do expect this will end. And I'm still quite hopeful that 2022 will be a year where that happens. And so we can't rule out that there will be another surprise. But as we build higher and higher levels of immunity, we think the virus will run out of room.
And we all hope for that. Joining me now is the director of the CDC, Dr. Rochelle Walensky. Thanks so much for coming.
And I don't have a Rochelle Walensky clip, but I do have a clip of a pundit panel talking about the Supreme Court looking at overturning Roe v. Wade and getting rid of the right to choose to have an abortion. And that I'm going to juxtapose with the Fox News pundit panel. And, we'll see how that goes. But I think, like I said, that was a really corporate news segment because it showed you it had like the fair and balanced two-sided opinions there was between the president of the Moderna Corporation and the CEO of the Moderna Corporation about that statement that roiled the markets. There's no world in which vaccine effectiveness doesn't drop. And of course, Moderna has a financial interest in wanting to sell more vaccines. And one of the things I heard in a clip I think I didn't use from Face the Nation, I think it might have been, was it Scott Gottlieb? I can't remember. But one of the doctors was saying that one of the reasons they don't want to move over to an Omicron-based vaccine that is specific for the Omicron variant is they think it will be less effective against other variants compared to, maybe it was something Anthony Fauci said I think Anthony Fauci said it in the State of the Union interview before the part I showed you. But basically that the original Wuhan-based or Wuhan variant, that is a vaccine based on the original Wuhan variant, is more effective against all other variants than a new vaccine that targets the Omicron variant would be. So that's the downside of an Omicron-specific vaccine. But like I was talking about last week, the best thing that anybody can do apparently is get three vaccinations, get like the original 2 plus the booster. And you saw both Dr. Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins last week talking about how that seems to like super activate the immune system to be effective against all sorts of spike proteins and coronaviruses. And one of the worrisome things about the Omicron variant is apparently people who have been, that natural immunity is much less effective against the Omicron variant. There are a lot of people who got COVID before and their natural immunity isn't working against Omicron. So this is another reason why even if you have natural immunity, you should go through the vaccination process. But anyway, I'm going way off on to tangents of things that doctors said in clips I'm not showing you. But one criticism I have of the ABC News summary is I think they focus way too much on the Omicron variant and not enough on the real threat from the ongoing Delta variant pandemic, worldwide especially, but even here in the United States. They showed a little bit that Dr. Beaumont talking about there's already a winter surge. I'm going to show you the CBS News summary after I show the NBC one, But I've been talking about how naturally the COVID moves from like the south, east of the United States, where in the summer, where it's too hot outside, and so they go inside in the summer, and because that's where COVID spreads, indoor. And then in the winter, when there are places in the United States where it gets too cold to stay outside, and so people go indoors in the winter, that's where we get our winter or for all respiratory illnesses, but that's the pattern with COVID. And that's kind of, they didn't really show that pattern in the ABC clip. Later in the CBS clip, you'll see this. That current transmission map, so look for that. That's why the CBS news summary is better than the ABC one, and it's less corporate, even though CBS always has on Scott Gottlieb, who's on the board of Pfizer. But before I get to the CBS news summary, since I'm going from longest to shortest, I'm going to show you the NBC News Meet the Press news summary from Chuck Todd, where he focuses on the abortion case in the Supreme Court last week, and he uses this like practical versus political, which is important because you'll hear his newsmaker guest. I'm going to show you a Republican senator from Indiana, Mike Braun, cross-examined not particularly well by Chuck Todd. I'll be criticizing Chuck Todd's cross-examination, but you'll see when he's talking, he brings up the practical versus political in a way that I don't think is honest, and Chuck Todd never calls him on it. But and then, of course, NBC News Meet the Press is using this lens to look at the news almost every week, like America divided. This is more evidence of America divided. So anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch the NBC News Meet the Press news summary from yesterday together over here.
A good Sunday morning. We're going to take a look at the Supreme Court abortion case from two perspectives today, the practical and the political. What was clear from the arguments this past week is that a 6-vote majority is ready to uphold Mississippi's abortion ban at 15 weeks before viability. But what's still at issue is, will the court just weaken, or will they fully overturn Roe v. Wade? Roughly half the states are certain or very likely to make abortion illegal if it's a full overturn. And it unravels nearly 50 years of constitutionally protected abortion rights in the country. And abortion rights advocates concede the fight to win back those rights can be counted in decades, not years. At the same time, there are political consequences as well. The case could actually brighten what is a grim outlook right now for Democrats in 2022. The court has long been an energizing issue for Republican voters. Could the neutering of Roe now energize angry Democrats and women in general as we head towards the midterm elections? The abortion debate is perhaps the longest running example of an increasingly divided America. Split over guns, voting rights, education, climate, and lately, vaccine requirements. But none of those divisive issues have the emotional power and relevance of abortion. And none so rested on one election. All elections have consequences, but 3 of the justices ready to undo Roe were appointed to the court by President Trump, reminding us that the 2016 election will continue to have consequences in American law for decades to come. Activists are bracing for a new battle over one of the nation's starkest political divides.
What this case is about is whether the Supreme Court is going to adhere to an almost 50-year precedent of respecting the individual liberty to make decisions about pregnancy.
Unborn babies are human beings. And they should be protected as any human being would.
In arguments on Wednesday, Chief Justice John Roberts signaled he might uphold the Mississippi law without explicitly overturning Roe.
If it really is an issue about choice, why is 15 weeks not enough time?
But he appeared to be alone, as other members of the court's conservative majority went much further. Republican Senator Susan Collins has defended her vote for Justice Brett Kavanaugh.
He noted repeatedly that Roe had been upheld by Planned Parenthood versus Casey, describing it as precedent on precedent.
I said that it's settled as a precedent of the Supreme Court entitled to respect under principles of stare decisis.
But now,
if we think that the prior precedents are seriously wrong, if that, why then doesn't the history of this court's practice with respect to those cases tell us that the right answer is actually to return to the position of neutrality?
On Wednesday, the Democratic appointees on the court tried to appeal to their colleagues' concerns about the court's political standing.
If people actually believe that it's all political, how will we survive? How will the court survive?
A majority of Americans believe abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Just 32% favor overturning Roe. 58% oppose. If Roe is overturned, 12 states have explicit trigger laws, which would immediately ban abortion. Experts say some 24 states are either certain or very likely to make the procedure illegal, and more could do so.
What would happen if the Supreme Court overturned Roe for you?
For us, that would mean that we would be closing within the next 30 days.
With the future of Roe in doubt, the consequences of the 2016 election loom even larger.
We're going to appoint judges who will support, defend, and uphold the Constitution.
Do we want him appointing our judges?
Donald Trump cemented his legacy with 3 new Supreme Court justices. Now, the court's decision will come just months before the midterm elections and could reshape a political environment which now favors Republicans.
The reaction to the overturn will be thermonuclear, and it is the foreseeable event that has the greatest chance of changing the trajectory of the midterms.
You want to see a revolution? Go ahead, outlaw Roe v. Wade.
Joining me now is Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Senator Klobuchar, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks, Chuck.
And I won't have a clip of Amy Klobuchar, but I will have a clip of Senator Mike Braun of Indiana being ineffectively cross-examined by Chuck Todd. And then the 2 Republicans I have trying to explain their position on abortion are Senator Mike Braun of Indiana talking to Chuck Todd on Face the Nation. That's clip number 11. But before that is Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi. You remember I had him last week. I think it was talking to Chuck Todd. I think Jake Tapper does a better job this week of cross-examining him. Although there's still some things they both get away with in terms of constitutional law, I guess, just because that's something I know a lot about. And then I was watching the live comments along the way during that clip. Every time I see Kavanaugh there, it really galls me. And I saw Sexy Bob in the live comments said, "Beer boy lied." Yeah, because remember, he said, "I like beer." And I don't know if how many of you remember from my coverage of the Kavanaugh nomination on my Sunday live stream, but I know for pretty much a fact that Brett Kavanaugh lied to get on the... He definitely lied about his drinking behavior at Yale, because I lived in the same freshman dorm with Brett Kavanaugh at Yale in 1982, 1983. I took a couple years off between my sophomore and junior year, so I didn't graduate with Brett Kavanaugh, but I not only was in the same freshman class, but I lived in Lawrence Hall, the same freshman dorm, and I watched what happened very closely, and some of the things he said about his drinking behavior, like especially about not getting blackout drunk, but he joined this the DKE or Deke fraternity, and then there's the whole Deborah Ramirez incident where there several people I actually know were never interviewed by the FBI. And anyway, I don't want Brett Kavanaugh lied his way onto the Supreme Court, and Republicans stopped the FBI from investigating or interviewing a lot of the witnesses. They just cut off the investigation. So it is kind of a travesty, and I guess I shouldn't thank you, Sexy Bob, and thank you, Chuck Todd, in that clip, or NBC News Meet the Press producers, I guess, that for bringing up Brett Kavanaugh and letting me repeat the lies of Brett Kavanaugh that got him on the Supreme Court, because he's the middle one where, I mean, that's the reason why his seat is illegitimate. The 3, and then the first one was stolen. Should have. That was supposed to be Obama's nomination to replace Scalia, but Neil Gorsuch took it because Mitch McConnell held up the seat for a year, and then they did the opposite on the other end when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, and that's how we got Amy Coney Barrett. So basically all 3 Trump appointments have the the stench of illegitimacy, and some people think Brett Kavanaugh, that's legitimate because it happened in the middle, but no. He lied his way onto the Supreme Court, and the Republicans and the Trump administration prevented the FBI from doing his freshman college roommate was in 7 FBI background checks, was never interviewed, not once. What does FBI stand for? Forget about it? I actually tweeted that back during the time of the nomination. Anyway, big tangent, but just don't get me started on Brett Kavanaugh. Ugh. Anyway, I thought that was the best news summary on the abortion issue. It gave a lot of context to, watching Trump and Hillary Clinton and elections have consequences. That was also really galling, but that's something I talked about at the time as well. And now we're going to see Roe v. Wade overturned, and that's the one commentary I also wanted to add that, there's like this sort of, it's not a rule, but one of the truisms is you can't tell how a court is going to rule just by listening to the questions they ask during oral argument. But I think if ever there were a case that breaks that rule, it's this one, because we could already tell how they treated the Texas case, the 6-week heartbeat bill that lets vigilantes go out and sue anyone who helps a woman get an abortion after 6 weeks in Texas, and they didn't stop that. They still haven't stopped it. So the way they let that totally unconstitutional law get enacted in Texas was like the first hint. But if you listen to those oral arguments, kind of like you heard in that news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press, it became pretty clear that the only one who, John Roberts, the Chief Justice, who looks like he's looking for some way to not overturn Roe, but just move the 24-week, get rid of viability and maybe go to 15 weeks or some other kind of standard, but pretend they're not overruling Roe. But he's only one of the 6 members of the conservative majority, and it really sounded like the other 5 were ready to overrule Roe v. Wade. So even though you can't tell for sure from what the questions they ask in oral argument, that is something that, having watched the entire oral argument myself, I think based on that, based on things like what they said in their confirmation hearings and what they didn't say, and based on their, what they did in the Texas case, that they are going to overrule Roe v. Wade, and there will no longer be a protected right of women to choose whether or not to continue their pregnancies, and it'll be left up to the states. And I'll talk about that more when I get to the newsmaker and pundit discussions of the Supreme Court taking up Roe v. Wade and probably overturning it. But I now want to get to the CBS News Face the Nation news summary I promised earlier, which I think is better than the one from ABC. And it's Margaret Brennan, Mark Strassmann back in Atlanta, and then Elizabeth Palmer reporting from South Korea. I don't continue that because it would be way too long, but they look at both what's happening in the United States, and then Elizabeth Palmer talks about what's happening in the rest of the world, which you don't get enough of in U.S. reporting. And they don't just concentrate on Omicron. They also talk about how the real problem is Delta in the news summary I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. We find ourselves today with many more questions than answers when it comes to Omicron, the new, highly contagious coronavirus strain discovered in Africa. What we do know is that we are far from being done with the Delta variant. Senior national correspondent Mark Strassmann has more from Atlanta.
In COVID America, Omicron's the Greek letter that means, here we go again.
Oh, God.
Northwest Philly.
No. Are you serious?
A new variant, a new call to arms, to put shots in them.
We're actively taking steps to stay ahead of Omicron.
We'd better. Omicron's a shadowy threat. Still unclear whether this highly mutated variant's the most contagious yet. And consider a different worry. Omicron hysteria. It's a potential distraction from New York.
We have a much bigger current challenge with the Delta variant.
To Washington State.
It would be really sad if people lose their lives today because they've been killed by the Delta variant, while they're worrying about Omicron.
Delta is dominating the U.S. now. 99.9% of this country's current caseload. In 47 states, cases trend up. Roughly 76% of U.S. counties considered high transmission areas. Hotspots? Iowa. Wednesday saw a 2021 record for COVID patients hospitalized. 3 in 4 of them unvaccinated. Massachusetts, averaging more than 3,000 new cases a day for the first time since January. And Michigan, COVID hospitalizations almost doubled in 1 week. A possible storm of community spread because of Thanksgiving. All those travelers and family get-togethers with COVID uninvited but present. It'll be a week, maybe 2, before data starts quantifying the infection impact. Also ahead, our second COVID Christmas. What do scientists want?
The answer is vaccines, vaccines, and vaccines.
Roughly 70% of Americans have had at least one shot. Only about 24%, age 18 and up, have had boosters. Waning protection is a genuine worry. Even fully vaccinated people can become spreaders after 4 months. Omicron has created one surge already in vaccinations. 2.2 million shots given last Thursday, including more than 1 million boosters. That's the highest single-day total since May.
If you were fully vaccinated before June, it's time for you to go get your booster.
Omicron has prompted another travel change, this one starting at midnight tonight. International arrivals have to pass a pre-departure COVID test. The window used to be 3 days, now it's 1. And that's regardless of nationality or vaccination status. Margaret?
Mark Strassmann, thank you. Concern over COVID is escalating around the world, too, with a lot of attention focused on the ground zero of Omicron, South Africa. Senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer has more from her new post in Seoul, South Korea.
The fact is, the vast majority of COVID disease in the world is still caused by the Delta variant. It's hammering Germany in a 4th wave that had alarmed medical staff in Bavaria so much they lit up the ICU facility in red as a warning. And the Air Force has been drafted in to transfer patients to hospitals that can still cope. South Koreans, all strictly masked, are lining up in droves to be tested as the country reels under the biggest spike since the pandemic began. And Delta has been especially lethal in Russia, where it's killed more than 75,000 mostly unvaccinated people this fall. So
that's a good reminder for people here in the U.S. that COVID is raging in a lot of places with a lot less vaccine. And in Europe, Russia, and that's one of the problems. And I mean, there are also problems with vaccine hesitancy in other parts of the world. But like I said, I think if you compare that to the ABC news summary on the same topic, it's better. And also, I didn't even show I just showed the whole Mark Strassmann report, which I think had a more balanced view of the Omicron threat versus the actual Delta pandemic that's ongoing in the United States right now. And if Omicron had never happened, it would still be very worrisome that there's going to be another wave this winter, especially with people traveling for the holidays. I just had Thanksgiving, and then we've got Christmas and New Year's, and people are gathering. And like I said, I went to Texas a few weeks ago, and it's like a different world from what's going on here in California. It's like almost nobody's wearing a mask, and I'm sure a lot of people aren't vaccinated, and that's what is causing this pandemic to continue. So anyway, I thought that CBS did a better job of covering that one topic. And if you want to see the entire Elizabeth Palmer report, if you go down to the link I put in the video description under sources for CBS News Face the Nation, it goes to their YouTube channel where they have the whole program split into segments that you can watch for free on YouTube, including the rest of that Elizabeth Palmer report. But like I said, my one criticism of Face the Nation is they never mentioned the word abortion or the abortion case. Nothing didn't come up in the entire CBS News Face the Nation program, which is why I will have Vivek Murthy later on from CBS News' Face the Nation, talking about the ineffectiveness of travel bans and also whether it's ethical for Americans to be getting their booster shots, their third vaccine shot, when other people in the world can't even get their first shot. But I want to finish the news summaries. The next one is the outlier, the odd man out, as usual, Fox News. I don't know if it's really biased. This is actually bias that a lot of programs have when they have an exclusive venue or guest. They tend to focus on that, even though it's not the most important news story. And I guess since they're at the Reagan Library and this defense, this defense seminar that they had Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin speaking, and you'll see a clip of that. Chris Wallace is in front of the Air Force One that Ronald Reagan used, and I don't know why they deify Reagan like they do in the Republican Party. I've talked about that before over the years, but anyway, this news summary is focusing on the Russian threat to Ukraine and problems in the U.S.-Russian relationship in the Fox News Sunday news summary. I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
You are looking live at the Air Force One Pavilion at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. And welcome to a special hour of Fox News Sunday from the Reagan National Defense Forum. Each year, key national security figures meet here to discuss threats the U.S. faces around the world. But this weekend, the focus is on one challenge: Vladimir Putin's massive buildup of Russian troops along the border with Ukraine. U.S. intelligence warns of a possible invasion early next year. On Tuesday, President Biden will hold a video call with Putin, trying to head off an international crisis. Here at the forum yesterday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin addressed the situation.
In terms of our concern, we're very concerned, and it's something that we're going to remain focused on going forward.
Throughout this hour, we'll drill down into foreign policy threats in Ukraine and around the world. And to start, let's bring in David Spunt at the White House with the latest on the standoff between the U.S. and Russia. David.
Chris, tensions between Moscow and Kiev go back decades, but things today appear to be coming to a head. Now President Biden is getting personally involved. President Biden looking to press concerns Russia could invade Ukraine. Russia has more than 100,000 troops along the border.
My expectation is we're going to have a long discussion.
Just days ago, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his team discovered a Russian coup plot that would take him out.
What we have to know is that we are in complete control of our borders and fully ready for any escalation.
Some kind of escalation appears imminent. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin saying the U.S. has helped shore up Ukraine.
We have provided them with a number of different things over the years, including lethal capability, a lot of non-lethal capability.
Russia is trying to block Ukraine from joining NATO. Biden and Vladimir Putin met face-to-face at a June summit. Publicly, Putin has and continues to praise Biden, saying recently Biden is a professional who, quote, doesn't miss a thing. But privately, U.S. officials admit flattery only goes so far, and President Biden will tell Putin to back off and recognize Ukrainian sovereignty. The president will also reportedly speak to his Ukrainian counterpart, another way to lower the temperature and avoid a superpower confrontation. Chris.
David Spunt reporting from the White House. David, thank you. Earlier here at the Reagan Defense Forum, I sat down with Republican Senator Joni Ernst, the first female combat veteran elected to the Senate, who's now a member of the Armed Services Committee, and also Michelle Flournoy, former Undersecretary of Defense under President Obama. And we began with a growing crisis on Ukraine's border. Senator, Michelle, welcome to Fox.
And I kept it playing so you could see Senator Joni Ernst was on, female Republican, not asked one question about abortion. I mean, I guess the defense expert from the Obama administration kind of makes sense. You know, why, I mean, I guess you could ask her because she's a woman, but why not a female Republican senator doesn't get one question about the abort? I mean, I'm going to show you who they actually had their national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin on, maybe because she's a woman, along with Karl Rove, former Bush advisor, George W. Bush advisor. By the way, I said that George H.W. Bush gave Dr. Anthony Fauci the Medal of Freedom, but it was George W. Bush who did, which makes more sense. That was a stupid mistake on my part. But you're going to see Karl Rove and Jennifer Griffin talk about abortion as part of the pundit panel, the only discussion of the abortion case on Fox News Sunday, which I will juxtapose with actual legal experts talking about abortion on a pundit panel on ABC, which was their only discussion of abortion. But so at least they both discussed the issue, unlike CBS. But anyway, I don't know why it was that Fox News never asked Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa about abortion. I mean, I remember she got elected by saying she was like she castrated hogs, like based on her experience castrating hogs, so I guess that does give her some insight into reproductive rights. I don't know. But anyway, did not get asked that question. I'm going to finish up with the final news summary, the shortest of all the news summaries. CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper focuses just on COVID at the beginning, although he does have Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves on later, which I'll show, where I think he does some good substantive work cross-examining him on the abortion issue, although missing some legal points that I'll want to talk about. But at least even in this brief news summary, I think Jake Tapper does a better job of balancing the Omicron threat with the reality of Delta in the final news summary that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is trying to stay calm. New this morning, South Africa's president says hospitalizations from Omicron are not increasing at an alarming rate as more states across the United States confirm cases of the new Omicron COVID variant, and scientists race to understand how dangerous this variant really is. President Biden is laying out his plan to make it through what could be a difficult winter, including tighter travel rules, free at-home testing, and a major push to get more booster shots into arms. And while the concerns over this new variant dominate the headlines, the Delta variant continues to cause misery across the U.S. Nearly every state saw a steep rise in COVID cases over the past week, and the country is back more than 100,000 cases a day for the first time in 2 months. Let's go straight to Dr. Anthony Fauci, director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
And I already showed you the only Anthony Fauci clip. I'm going to show you where Jake Tapper asked him about that Senator Ron Johnson smear about overhyping AIDS and overhyping COVID, where Jake Tapper said, I don't think he knows what he's saying either, or whatever at the end. So, anyway, that's the last of the news summaries. You can decide which covered the most important stories best. I think I made my opinions clear along the way. Next, I'm going to show you 4 clips on my main topic. There are going to be 2 pundit panels discussing the abortion issue before the Supreme Court, and then 2 newsmaker interview clips. ABC and Fox News both had pundit panels. Then Jake Tapper talked to Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves, and Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press talked to Indiana Senator Mike Braun. So I think I'm going to show you the ABC pundit panel was a little bit shorter, and I even cut off the very end of the Fox News one. I mean, there was one important fact that Jennifer Griffin, the national security correspondent from Fox News, brings up in the second clip I'm going to show you of pundits talking about this. But why do they have Karl Rove, the political advisor to George W. Bush, and Jennifer Griffin, their national security? I mean, Terry Moran is chief national correspondent for ABC, but then they have this Kate Shaw, who's at least a law professor at Cardoso Law School, I think. And so this is a better in-depth discussion of what's going on in the Supreme Court from pundits than what you're going to see from Fox News next. But it's a good juxtaposition between the two, and I'll talk about this one a little more after we watch together over here.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper in Washington.
Oh, sorry, wrong clip. After we watch it together over here.
Why'd you guys come out today?
To support life, to tell the Supreme Court that life is important. So I just wanted to let the justices know that we are hoping and praying that they will choose life.
Our rights as people with uteruses are being chipped away on a daily basis. Every single time we come here, we are fighting harder and harder to protect the rights of women and trans women and people in the United States to have access to have body autonomy.
The Supreme Court could be on the verge of rolling back Roe versus Wade after arguments this week in a blockbuster case over a Mississippi law banning abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy. A lot at stake, so we brought in our experts, senior national correspondent Terry Moran and constitutional law professor Kate Shaw. Good morning to you both. And Terry, I want to start with you because you've been covering this all week. It became very clear very quickly that the conservative justices are poised to uphold the Mississippi law.
Uphold the Mississippi law. And what was so striking about the arguments, Martha, was that you could hear in real time this strong conservative majority on the Supreme Court, 6 justices, discussing not so much whether they should overturn or really gut Roe versus Wade, but how they should do it. It was really a discussion of how far they will go. And it seemed to me that the weight of the momentum on the conservative side is to go whole hog. It feels to me like in June, America is going to be a very different place for women and reproductive rights.
The weight of the conservative justices, let's talk about that, Kate. They may want to uphold the Mississippi law, but do you think all of them want to overturn Roe? Do they want to go that far?
Martha, I think there's no question they want to uphold the Mississippi law. And I think that 5 of them do seem to want to go further and to overturn Roe rather than to limit the right to abortion that it announced. You know, I don't know that John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is ready to overturn Roe or to cast a vote to do that. But there are 5 more conservative justices than him on the court at this point. So it actually doesn't matter. So I did hear from the oral argument pretty strong signs that 5 of them are ready to go that far and to overturn Roe outright by the end of June.
Kate, were you surprised at how quickly they moved on this?
I was, right? So Amy Coney Barrett has been on the court just over a year, having replaced, of course, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I guess I thought the court would move more incrementally to limit rather than to overturn Roe with this newly constituted conservative supermajority. But I didn't see any signs of that kind of caution or incrementalism. It sounded as though they know they have the votes to do it, and they are likely to do so. And we should say, Martha, that's a seismic change in American law for over 50 years. This has been a right the Constitution has protected. And it's never really been the case before that the Supreme Court has moved to overturn a case where that prior case announced a right. So essentially to take a right back. The court overturns its precedents relatively routinely, but never really in a case like this.
So, Terry, if it is overturned, what happens in the states?
Well, there are a dozen states and more with laws already on the books and ready to go. A trigger law. Roe versus Wade is overturned, they will ban abortion, and there will be more following. No question about it. They'll test the limits if they don't outright overturn Roe. They are lined up to do this, and I think what you'll see is that abortion will be criminalized, not just in many states, but in entire regions of the country. Women will be hundreds of miles, more than hundreds of miles, thousands of miles maybe in some instances, very, very long distance to get access to abortion. And we will have a patchwork of abortion rights, but it'll be more than that. In the South, from South Carolina all the way to Texas and Oklahoma and north up to Wisconsin, which has a trigger law, in the Midwest, abortion will be criminalized.
And Terry, it's surprising because Supreme Court justices are supposedly chosen by presidents because they reflect the values of their constituents. A recent ABC News Washington Post poll says 60% of Americans say the court should uphold Roe v. Wade, and 75% say the decision to have an abortion should be left to the woman and her doctor, not regulated by law.
But this has been the Republican mission since Roe, to appoint Supreme Court justices that would overturn Roe versus Wade. They've tried and tried and tried for decades. The last time there was a majority of justices on the Supreme Court of the United States who had been appointed by Democratic presidents was May 14th, 1969. Republicans have nominated 16 of the 20 justices since then, and some of those Republicans were presidents who did not win majority votes. George Bush in his first term, of course, and Donald Trump. And so this has been a goal of the Republican Party, organized to do it, and they're on the brink of success.
And Kate, I want to turn to that school shooting in Michigan.
So there were a lot of good things about that analysis from ABC. You saw like people who are supposedly bigger experts than me confirm that from the oral argument, it really sounded like there were, other than Justice Roberts, there were 5 more conservative votes to overturn Roe. Roberts was the only one who seemed to want to limit it. One thing I disagree with Kate Shaw, that law professor from Cardozo Law School, that she was saying the Supreme Court has never taken a right away. Well, there actually was this right to... there was this Lochner case that was the law for, I don't know, was it only like 20 years maybe, where you had a right to contract. The Lochner case, and it stopped the ability of the government to regulate your ability to contract, like with minimum wage laws or maximum worker hours or worker safety or child labor laws even, were all like struck down because of the right to contract. I believe in the Lochner case specifically, it was whether there could be a maximum number of hours that bakers could work. And that was overturned during the FDR administration in West Coast Hotel versus Parish. And that was actually something Kavanaugh mentioned as and so that, I mean, if you consider the right to contract a right, that was one right I could think of that has been taken away by the Supreme Court after it was there for, I think it was only like 10, 15, 20 years between Lochner and West Coast, West Coast Hotel versus Parish, but I have to look that up. I didn't look that up. So that was one quibble I have with Kate Shaw, but I think Terry Moran, of all the people on all the 5 corporate news shows, he, in that clip, maybe did the best job of painting a picture of what it's going to look like in terms of the damage it's going to do to women. Talking about women having to travel thousands of miles and whole regions of the country where it's illegal to get an abortion, to, make that reproductive choice. He did mention one of those, it will also go into Wisconsin. That is something that's going to come up in the next clip. Jennifer Griffin actually mentions 3 states, swing states, where there are trigger abortion laws that could be really important in both the midterm elections and the 2024 presidential campaign, assuming the Supreme Court overrules Roe v. Wade. And then the last thing I wanted to give credit to Terry Moran for pointing out that, the Roe v. Wade court, 7 of the 9 justices who voted 6-3 in Roe v. Wade were appointed by Republicans. And Terry Moran pointed out that there's been a majority of Republican appointees on the court since May 14th, 1969. And then a lot of those justices, like the George W. Bush first term, and then Donald Trump, where the presidents who appointed these justices who are taking away people's rights didn't even get a majority of the vote. One other thing is the Senate. The Republicans in the Senate haven't represented a majority of Americans in a really long time, even though, like Mitch McConnell was the Svengali of that entire Supreme Court packing thing. They say the Democrats are thinking about packing the Supreme Court, but that's just what happened with the 3 Trump appointments that I already talked about. But anyway, that's all the commentary I want to add to that clip, and it's so much better than this 1 minute longer pundit panel with Chris Wallace, Jennifer Griffin, their national security correspondent, and Karl Rove. Karl Rove there's this mantra I keep hearing, and you'll hear it in the Republican newsmaker clips about send it back to the states, send it back to the states, which, what other rights, fundamental individual rights do we say, oh, well, we'll leave it up to the states to decide? That's a fallacy that I'll talk about a little later when I do some more constitutional analysis. But one of the amusing things about this also, they didn't ask Senator Joni Ernst, the female Republican in the Senate, but and even in this segment, the woman gets to talk about abortion third. Chris Wallace, then Karl Rove, then Jennifer Griffin. But Jennifer Griffin does make one good point about the 3 swing states that I will talk about a little more after we watch this. I'm sorry to subject you to this much Karl Rove, but I wanted to juxtapose it with the better pundit panel. And actually, I even cut off a little bit at the end where Karl Rove was predicting how the Supreme Court would rule, and he also talks about, in the part that I'm not going to show, how there's not a right to abortion in the Constitution, but I'll talk about that more later in the show and after we watch the Fox News Sunday pundit discussion of abortion. Karl Rove, Jennifer Griffin, Chris Wallace over here.
To another big story this week, and that was the Supreme Court hearing that big Mississippi abortion case. And the conservative majority of justices seemed to indicate that there was a possibility that they either might severely restrict Roe v. Wade or overturn it entirely. And the reaction to that was both immediate and intense. Take a look.
For nearly half a century, every woman, every American deserves access to health care, including reproductive health care.
There are at least a dozen states that have laws on the books today that if this case in Mississippi is upheld, those states get to defend life immediately in ways that they weren't prior to today.
Carl, because of the fact that abortion is legal now, at least in the early months of pregnancy, it has been much more of a mobilizing issue for the pro-life movement than it has been for the pro-choice movement. But if that were to change, if Roe is severely restricted or if it is completely eliminated by a Supreme Court ruling, let's say it comes out in June or July, what's the political impact of that as we head to the 2022 midterms?
Well, we don't really know, because what the decision is, if the decision returns it to the states, which is the most likely outcome, whether it's restrictive or undermines Casey and Roe both in toto, it's going to go back to the states. So this is now going to be a battle that is fought out state by state in the state legislative races. But, you know, there are going to be some victories for the pro-life forces. There are going to be some defeats if it goes to the states, given the nature of the legislatures. But let's remember this. We don't really know how big this is going to be. In Virginia, it became a big issue. Terry McAuliffe said, you elect Youngkin as governor, this is going to undermine it. Only 8% of the people in the exit polls said this was their voting issue, and they broke 58-41 for Youngkin. Similarly, we had in Texas a woman who ran for governor in 2014 who made her entire issue abortion, and she lost the governor's race by 20 points. So we don't know how it's going to play out, but there will be some winners and losers on both sides because it'll be at the state level.
Jennifer, Republicans seem headed for a very good midterm election night, likely taking back the House, possibly taking back the Senate. If you get a big change in Roe v. Wade, does that have the possibility of flipping that political equation?
Well, I think it does. Let's think about what happened. On Friday, they actually took an initial vote in the Supreme Court. They had their conference. They probably already know how this is decided. They will take the next 9 months to write the decision. It'll come out in June. And that is just months before these midterm elections. It is likely to deepen the divide between red states, blue states. I think there is one very important number that I saw. 21 states have abortion bans on the books. If Roe is overturned or weakened, those abortion bans will affect 65 million women. And 3 of those states are states, Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin, that were decided by single digits in 2016 and 2020. I think this is the one issue that could motivate the Democratic base, and I think that it actually will be a shot of adrenaline for the Democratic Party going into the midterms.
Let me pick up on that with you and perhaps push back a little with Carl, but I'm going to give you a chance to respond, as you will. One of the things we saw with the Youngkin victory in Virginia was that the suburban women who had moved away from Trump and to Biden came back for the Republican Youngkin, who seemed more moderate. But I wonder, and I wonder what you think about this, the possibility that it energizes these swing voters if they lose, a lot of them are pro-choice, lose that option by a Supreme Court ruling.
I think you have to look at suburban women. And I think if you look at the statistics, ABC Washington Post poll says that 60% of the country is pro-choice. I think this is one issue that could really motivate suburban women, and those independent voters you're going to have to look at.
Sure. Carl?
Well, 65% of the AP polls say they believe that abortion should be restricted in the second trimester, and only 19% say abortion should be allowed most or all abortions in the third trimester. We're not we're not the caricature of either infanticide or no abortions at all. We're somewhere else in the between. And the question is going to be, how is it fought out? But the idea that somebody stands up and says, we want an unrestricted right to abortion right up to the moment that the child is born is not going to be accepted by the American people.
No, I completely agree with you with that, but that's not what we're talking about here, because what we're talking about is the possibility that the Supreme Court might say there is no protection, constitutional protection for women. It's a state-by-state issue at all. There's no constitutional right to an abortion at any point.
Right, but that leaves it up to the states to determine the medical procedure, and states will make different determinations. Will this have an effect in the election? Yes. I think it will have impact in individual races for governor and state legislature far more than it will for the United States Senate or the U.S. House. And again, let's not kid ourselves. We are not a country that says we want an unlimited right to abortion. As I say, 19%, 1 out of every 5 Americans says, yeah, we ought to have a right to an abortion in the third trimester. 2 out of 3 Americans say we ought to limit it in the second trimester, and the number goes higher in the first trimester.
Jennifer?
I think politically this is still a shot of adrenaline for the Democrats. I think you'll start seeing ballot initiatives in states. It will take up a lot of airtime in these elections, and I think that there'll be more talk about expanding the court among Democrats.
Already is.
I got less than a minute, Carl. I know it's dangerous to predict what the court is going to do based on the questions that justices ask during hearings, but it did seem.
And there they go on to take the same position that I've made, and you heard other people take, that it seemed pretty clear what position 5 of the 6 conservative justices were going to take. But near the end, and then Karl Rove went on to predict that and send it back to the states, and he said that they're just going to say it was a bad decision and that there is no such right in the Constitution. And I'll talk about that a little later when I get to these next 2 newsmaker interviews, Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi and Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. But I think you have to agree that the ABC discussion was so much better than the Fox News one. Karl Rove seemed to be making an argument like a political argument, wishful thinking almost, about the lack of effect. He's talking about the Virginia race where they tried to make abortion an issue, and this 2014 Texas governor's race. Well, that's going to be a whole lot different if the Supreme Court says that the Constitution doesn't protect an individual right to make that choice everywhere in the country. That's going to be, you can't really compare the past to that very probable future, it looks like, according to at least the conventional wisdom and all the pundits. The Supreme Court surprised us before, so it's certainly not a done deal, but based on what they did with the Texas vigilante 6-week law and based on the questioning of the justices, I'm not Neil Gorsuch. I didn't completely nail him down, but he, like you saw in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, Trump promised to appoint all justices who would overturn Roe v. Wade, and they were vetted by the Federalist Society to make sure that's going to happen. But anyway, I don't want to talk for too long. I'll talk a little more about sending it back to the states and where you find the right to abortion or the right to make intimate decisions about marriage, family, and reproduction. Where is that in the Constitution, and how did that right come about? And it actually kind of relates to that lockdown. You hear Sandy barking at the gardener over there, but that's probably a good reason to start playing a clip. So maybe there won't be as much noise when I'm done. This is Jake Tapper cross-examining Governor Tate Reeves, the governor of Mississippi, which has this law before the Supreme Court. And if the court overturns Roe v. Wade, they have like an even more restrictive trigger law. You saw how there are all the... I forgot to finish my criticism of that previous clip. I thought that actually Jennifer Griffin did that one good thing, pointing out that there were 21 states that would have abortion restrictions come into effect if Roe v. Wade is overturned, and that will affect 65 million women. And she also, Terry Moran in the previous analysis pointed out Wisconsin. She pointed out Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin all have these trigger laws, and those are all swing states. Michigan, Arizona, and Wisconsin could all have big abortion fights based on the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, which will really activate those suburban women like they were talking about. But anyway, I now want to get to Jake Tapper cross-examining Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi, who has the law in front of the Supreme Court, and also a more restrictive law that will go into effect. I don't think Jake Tapper does a great job cross-examining him on some of his legal arguments, which I will talk about after we watch the clip together. But he does come up with this one culture of life cross-examination question that I think is better than what you saw from Chuck Todd last week, or you'll see from Chuck Todd this week when he's talking to Republican Senator Mike Braun in the next clip. And why is Sandy barking? I don't know if you can hear Sandy barking, but I'm going to go investigate. Oh, and thank you to Tom Trask and Lulu Girl for those Super Chat contributions. I did see that along the way. Wanted to slip that in. I appreciate all the financial support that keeps me doing these weekly live streams. But now I got to go investigate why Sandy's barking while we watch Jake Tapper cross-examining Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves on CNN State of the Union yesterday together over here.
So the state of Mississippi also has a law in the books that would ban all abortions, with exceptions only for rape and the life of the mother, that would snap into effect. It's called a snapback law. Snap into effect just days after Roe is overturned, if Roe is overturned. If that happens, would you start enforcing that in your state, the almost complete ban, regardless of how many weeks of the pregnancy?
Well, Jake, clearly it is dependent upon how the court rules and exactly what those opinions allow us to do. If, in fact, Roe is overturned, and by the way, I believe very strongly, as do many Americans, that the justices on the Supreme Court today could look at the Roe v. Wade case and come to the conclusion that the court just simply got it wrong in 1973. If you read the Constitution, in my opinion, there is no guaranteed right to an abortion in our U.S. Constitution. And furthermore, not only is there not a guaranteed right, there's also nothing in the Constitution that prohibits individual states from enacting their own laws. And after all, that's really what the Founding Fathers intended. For any issue that is not explicit in the Constitution, it should be left to the states and the state legislatures and the democratic process. And so I just want to make sure everyone is clear that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that doesn't mean that no one in America is going to have access, although that might make people like me happy. But what it does mean is that all 50 states, the laboratories of democracy, are going to have the ability to enact their own laws with respect to abortion. And I think that's the way it should be in America.
So is that a yes, that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, you will enforce the almost total abortion ban in Mississippi that exists in the inevitability or in the situation where Roe v. Wade is overturned? Yes?
Yeah, Jake, that is a yes, because if you believe, as I believe very strongly, that innocent unborn child in the mother's womb is in fact a child. The most important word when we talk about unborn children is not unborn, but it's children. And so, yes, I will do everything I can to protect the lives of those children.
So the country has been here before 1973, and what happens in reality is women of means are still able to get abortions, but poor women, young women, vulnerable women end up often seeking abortions in ways that can cause them severe harm, mutilation, if not death in some cases. So do you acknowledge that this step will result in some women and almost certainly getting seriously hurt, some even dying?
Well, I certainly would hope that that would not be the case, but what I would tell you, Jake, is that since Roe was enacted in 1973, there have been 62 million American babies that have been killed through this process, and I think that those babies in their mother's womb don't have the ability to stand up for themselves, and that's why they have to have people like me and others around this nation that for years have tried to stand up for unborn children. I think we have to do everything we can as policymakers to improve the quality of public health in our state, and when you look at this pandemic, there are a lot of negatives that have come from the pandemic, but one of the hopefully silver linings that come out of dealing with the pandemic over the last year and a half is that we have seen significant investments in infrastructure, both from the state and federal level in our public health system, and I think we need to continue to do that, and I think that's important.
So you clearly see this move as part of a culture of life, as you've said in the past. Mississippi, of course, ranks 50th in the country in infant mortality. Mississippi is nearly last when it comes to childhood hunger, according to a recent study of what kids need to thrive from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, looking at economic well-being and education and health and family and community. Mississippi ranks 50th out of 50 for child well-being. How do you square those statistics about Mississippi with what you say about a culture of life?
Well, first of all, when you look at that unborn baby in the womb and you consider it a human being, it really changes your perspective on lots of different things. But with respect to the statistics that you quoted, when I ran for office and then ultimately in my first inaugural address, I made it very clear to the people in my state that I believed in my heart that I was elected not to try to hide our problems or not to try to hide our challenges, but to try to fix them. And I perfectly acknowledge that many of those statistics in terms of health outcomes in our state, we're underperforming relative to other states across the nation, and it's incumbent upon all of us to work to pass policies to change that. And you know, when you look at health outcomes, whether it's prenatal care or other areas, we have a ways to go, and that hasn't become effective in the last year and a half, but it's happened over 200 years of our state's existence, and we're going to do everything we can to improve upon that.
Governor Tate Reeves of Mississippi, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate your time, sir.
So there were some good parts of that. There was one weird. When I had the Tate Reeves interview last week, he uses this weird phrase. I don't know. Is it just me or just the weird? Does it strike you as weird when he talks about American babies, like 62 million dead American babies? Like, what do you need the word American in there for? I don't know. Maybe because I don't know. But that always struck me as weird. And then I thought Jake Tapper did a really good job about that culture of life cross-examination that makes clear that, you know, the pro-life people in the Republican Party are, you know, life begins at conception and then ends at birth, apparently, because in Mississippi they don't care about infant mortality, child hunger, child well-being, and they rank really poorly in those things, as Jake Tapper pointed out, and that was a really good cross-examination, but not so much on the legal argument. Governor Tate Reeves there said there's no abortion right in the Constitution, and nothing that restricts states, and, you know, as the Founding Fathers wanted, and that, misses some really important points. First, the fact that a right isn't specifically listed in the Constitution, as I pointed out last week. Just read the Ninth Amendment. What does the Ninth Amendment say? The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Not the states, but the people. So just because a right's not enumerated, not listed, that should not be construed, i.e. that doesn't mean that it's not still protected by the Constitution, especially something fundamental like your ability to make choices about marriage, family, and reproduction free from government interference. That is a fundamental right that a lot of us, I think, could see as, even if it's not listed, that's something, if the government takes that away, that you've been violated, and it's something that all of us expect, and it's a part of, anyway. So that's the non-enumeration thing, and keep the word enumerated in mind when I get to the next clip of Mike Braun. He actually says it's not enumerated. It's not enumerated when, if you read the 9th Amendment, it specifically says just because it's not enumerated doesn't mean that it's not protected. In fact, like I said last week, when they passed the Bill of Rights, or when they added the Bill of Rights to the Constitution, one of their worries was, if we list these rights, people are going to think those are the only ones protected, but that's not the way the Constitution works. You keep your rights, except those that are specifically delegated to the federal government, or the states delegate to the federal government. And that's the other thing, and this is where I'm going to start talking some more about where the right to abortion comes from in the Constitution. The whole thing about no restriction on the states, as our founding fathers intended, well, that's actually true. That at the time that the Constitution and Bill of Rights were ratified, the Bill of Rights didn't apply to the states. There's actually a case, 1833 case of Barron versus Baltimore. The Supreme Court said that states can violate any of the rights in the Bill of Rights, because the Bill of Rights only applies to the federal government. That's the way when they passed it. The Bill of Rights only restrict what the federal government can do to people. The states being closer to the people, they can, that's between the states and their people. But that didn't work out too well, letting states decide like what rights people should have, state to state. That is actually, the whole state right to do that was one of the reasons they fought the Civil War about slavery, where some states said, well, there are certain people who they don't really get hardly any rights at all. We're going to enslave them. And after the Civil War, they passed the 14th Amendment. So, Tate Reeves there said, nothing restricts the states. Well, what about the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment? What does it say? Hold on. It says that no state can, quote, deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And then there's the Equal Protection Clause after that. So there is something that restricts states taking away your life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And that is actually why, after the Civil War, the Bill of Rights does apply to the states, because that's what the 14th Amendment can't take away your that says the states can't take away your liberties. And that is also where that due process clause saying states can't take away your liberties, that's where the right to privacy comes from substantive due process. It's also where that Lochner right to contract came from, but it's also where the Griswold right to make choices about buying, for married couples to buy contraceptives came from, where the right, where the Loving versus Virginia right to choose who you want to marry comes from. There was this case, is it Philadelphia, like where the government can't tell you like what degree relatives can live in the same household. This is what I was talking about, how there's a whole bunch of cases from the Supreme Court who, even though it's not in the it's not enumerated in the Constitution, because you have this fundamental right to liberty that's protected from the states by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, what's called substantive due process, the states can't do certain things to you, and that includes interfering in your right to make intimate decisions about family, marriage, and reproduction. So now you know why the Constitution does protect a right to choose to have an abortion. because it's in that long line of cases about all those rights. But I think I've fulfilled that promise. But I want to juxtapose that Jake Tapper interview of Governor Tate Reeves with, I think, a worse job that Chuck Todd does on NBC News' Meet the Press. He makes some of those same mistakes. He lets Senator Mike Braun of Indiana get away with saying it's not enumerated, even though the Ninth Amendment specifically says it doesn't have to be enumerated. But he keeps trying to get him to say, maybe it's just he's too slippery, but it's pretty sad that he won't take a position. His whole position is like, send it back to the states. Let the states decide. And, it shouldn't be a homogenous choice. But the thing, and he says it's something that's left to the states, but read the Ninth Amendment. Does it say states? No, it says the people. The people keep a lot of rights that aren't even enumerated. And even though he says the word enumerated, anyway, I think I've talked way too long between these two clips. This is the final Newsmaker clip on this topic. Then I have the Surgeon General Vivek Murthy clip, and then the general from Space Force, who Chris Wallace did not do a good job listening to his answer. But first, Chuck Todd does a bad job cross-examining the Republican senator from Indiana, Mike Braun, over here.
Start with the abortion laws in your home state. Some would argue some are somewhat restrictive from the perspective of a person seeking an abortion, but I want to put them down here as a baseline. In Indiana, there's state-directed in-person counseling. You can't do telemedicine. There's an 18-hour waiting period. There's a physical exam and an ultrasound, parental consent for minors, and the ban begins at 22 weeks, 2 weeks shorter than many other states that are at 24. You have said you are 100% pro-life. Is the law in Indiana, in your view, strong enough to support your pro-life position?
Chuck, I think it begs the question in general, whether our state is where it needs to be, whether Mississippi's, whether New York, Illinois. You hit it on the head earlier, political or practical. When it comes to issues like this that divide our country in a way to where we're never going to get to 60 votes on any of this stuff, I think the practical solution is, when it's not enumerated, return it to the states. The beauty of our system is that it's federal. It's got all these different ideas. And when you try to nationalize, federalize, the way the other side of the aisle is doing on more than just this, I think you're constantly in that area of contention. And when I got here 3 years ago, of course, we've gone through 2 impeachments. We've gone through the biggest health care crisis. A lot of these issues don't even get discussed, like the high cost of health care, maybe climate, maybe budgeting. How do we pay for all this? When it comes to things like abortion, I think it's clear it's time to turn it back to the states, let the diversity of this country show forth. It eliminates a lot of the contention to where we become the Hatfields and McCoys on many of these issues.
So when do you believe abortion should be available? Because you're going to have to vote on these issues now. Every elected official in the country is going to have to state very specifically now. A lot of times elected officials have been able to hide behind Roe. Either you're for it or against it. But now you got to get to specifics. So in your view, when should abortion be legal or be available?
So in my case, when you believe in the sanctity of life, you want abortions to be eliminated from the landscape if you can. You're also in the context of reasonability. And the fact is, regardless of what any one individual, maybe with the point of view of mine or of Amy's, you're not going to settle it in a homogenized way. And that needs to reflect itself throughout states, and whatever one's opinion is, whatever you're trying to do politically, why try to do it at the national level? We generally don't do things well here anyway, and on something as contentious as this, it seems like it would make common sense, it'd be practical and not political, to send it back to the states and let every state do what they want to do and live with it. And if you don't like it, then go to work within those legislatures. It was never enumerated in the Constitution that this would be something that would be done at the federal level. And it takes the decibel level, the caustic nature of politics, as we see it here in D.C., takes it to another place.
I understand it. You don't believe, though, there should be a baseline protection of a woman being able to get and have access to abortion. You don't believe there should be any baseline protection for that?
I think it's a difference, again, without the specificity of this issue, is when you come down to things like this, why you want to nationalize that in, say, your Bill of Rights, so to speak. It was never intended. When you have a judicial ruling, like occurred back in 73 and 92, that was a judicial ruling. And now it's being said to be constitutional, and that's where you get into the contention, into the highly vitriolic nature of politics, and I think that ought to be the domain of the states. That's the way the Constitution intended it to be.
All right, so you want to see a ban on abortion. How would you enforce a ban on abortion?
You're going to let that up to the individual states, and you might find that right mix. I'm not saying we got it right in Indiana. I'm saying it's not right in New York. Maybe you find that happy medium. What's your idea? More people are going to say, hey,
what's your idea?
My idea is that with what's happened with technology, when you look at all the things that we know now about the unborn, it needs to be different. It needs to be different from where it is. And I don't have the silver bullet. I don't intend to put it out there. I just think you got a better idea of getting where you need to be, not trying to homogenize it at the national level.
It sounds like you're uncomfortable with figuring out how you would enforce the ban, because I think that's a question. Do you criminalize abortion? Would you criminalize it?
I'm perfectly comfortable with doing it, just not at the level where everybody's got to live with the same thing. And when you talk about criminalizing it, then all you're doing is taking this to a logical extreme that you'll never get to anyway. We just need to take it off of where it is, send it back to the states. Let's find that right way to address it. And this applies to many other issues as well.
Well, I want to ask, because one of the issues, look, I originally invited you on to talk about the vaccine mandate, and you're a vigorous.
Yeah, and then Chuck Todd asked that question that I thought was stupid last week about, you want people to have a right to choose for their own bodies for vaccine mandates. What about for abortion? And I think that's a facile question that, but of course there's another life involved, though of course and Chuck Todd didn't even do a good job of following up on the other life involved, just like with Tate Reeves last week. So I didn't, and to perfectly juxtapose the Jake Tapper and Chuck Todd clips, they're both almost exactly, they're both like 5 minutes 45 seconds, or so I think you can see the cross-examination exactly the same amount of time, although like I said, I trimmed off the end of the Chuck Todd one, and I think did I trim off the beginning of the Tate Reeves one? I think I did, where he was like predicting what the Supreme Court was going to do, maybe. I can't remember. But anyway, I think I saw in the live comments, not only did I see another Super Chat contribution from Handy Salmon, so I appreciate that. But I saw somebody, let me see if I can find that comment that I don't think is true. Oh yeah, it's seriously short of normal. That's a good point from the interviewer. This situation forces members of Congress and the Senate to truly be transparent in their views through how they vote. Well, I mean, they can vote for or against ratifying Roe v. Wade, but I think what that response from Mike Braun, at least right now, shows is that Republicans have come up with this send it to the states talking point that they can use to deflect any questions about, should we criminalize it? What is your view on how many weeks? Or at least in that interview with Chuck Todd, Mike Braun got away with just send it to the states, send it to the states. And And as I mentioned when I showed the NBC News Meet the Press news summary, they started with their framing of the practical versus political, which apparently, I've talked about this before, how the newsmaker guests often watch the news summaries before they answer questions, which is one of the reasons it's important to show them first. And he mentioned the practical versus political thing that was in the news summary. And then he went on to say, well, here at the national level, it gets all political. Let's send it to the states where it's less contentious. Like, why in the state legislatures is it less political or less contentious? Chuck Todd never asked him that. And then he kept saying, it's not enumerated in the Constitution. And he was trying to say also not enumerated, saying that the states can't take care, decide the issue. But I talked about that, the 9th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, before I showed the clip, so that isn't really a good argument, and Chuck Todd didn't follow up on it. He also said, we don't do these things well at the national level. Well, I thought the Republicans were supposed to say government don't make these decisions well. Why don't we leave it up to individual women with their doctors? Why can't pregnant people decide whether they want to continue their pregnancies, at least until viability? I didn't want to go into the whole philosophy of why viability is a really important point at which the balance of interest changes. But if you really want to know, look up Judith Jarvis Thompson's philosophy article in defense of abortion and look at the whole famous violinist case. Just Google Judith Jarvis Thompson in defense of abortion or famous violinist. And got Dash and Sandy. I can't even take the clip because I forgot to bring my phone. There's like a whole Dash and Sandy clip going on right here. I have a Dash and Sandy clip coming up. But anyway, I think I did some good legal analysis on the right to abortion there. I saw also in the live comments someone said that it was like a weak argument. Is it one? Was it Seal Beater said that that's a weak argument. When I was talking about substantive due process, well, like I didn't make that up. Substantive due process is like a century-old constitutional law argument that has like a whole architecture built around it. I mean, study some constitutional law, then, it's not my argument. I'm like explaining like 100 years of constitutional law to you in 5 minutes. So I'm obviously giving you a simplified version, but I told you about Lochner and the right to contract and the right to, make intimate choices about family and marriage and reproduction, and this also has to do with the right to die and the right to make medical decisions and all. Like individual bodily autonomy is a fundamental right protected by the Constitution, even if it's not enumerated. Or right to privacy. There's the whole like penumbra right to privacy thing, but that's one of the like bad parts of Roe. But the idea that people have a right to control their own bodies without like a really strong government interest on the other side, that is like basic constitutional law. And then for the vaccines, then you get the whole public health thing, and the Biden vaccine mandate doesn't require vaccination. It actually only requires weekly testing if you don't want to get vaccinated. They keep calling it a vaccine mandate, but anyway, that's sort of going off on a tangent, but it actually gets me to my next clip, because that's the last clip on the abortion issue, and next I need to show you the final 2 newsmaker clips before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip. I wish I could have gotten that live one, but I forgot. I didn't bring my phone with me to sit down for I'll have to go get it while this clip is playing, maybe. Well, it's about 3 minutes long. I told you on CBS News' Face the Nation, they didn't cover the abortion issue at all, so I couldn't take any abortion clip or discussion of the Supreme Court's probable overturning of Roe v. Wade. Didn't come up once on Face the Nation, but an issue I talked about last week, travel bans and how they don't work. They didn't work when Trump did them. They don't work now. Do you hear Dash mewing off in the distance? That is something discussed by the Surgeon General. And then he also discussed the ethics of people getting their third vaccine, the booster shot, while in the United States, while around the world they can't even get their first shot. And I'll talk about that a little more after we watch Margaret Brennan talk to the Surgeon General about those two issues over here.
There are dozens of countries that now have this Omicron variant. The only region of the world under a U.S. travel ban are 8 countries in Africa. That doesn't really seem fair. Why single out South Africa and its neighboring countries?
Well, I'm glad you asked. And so let's talk about this. This was put in place, these restrictions in travel first, because there were a rapid growing number of cases that were found in South Africa. And the travel restrictions, they don't permanently keep the variant out. We know that. What travel restrictions can do is buy you some time. They can buy you some time to do important things. And what are the important things that we were doing?
I've heard this from the White House, respectfully, but my question, though, is what we learned at the beginning of this pandemic. China is put under a travel ban. Meanwhile, in the back door, travelers are coming in from Europe, bringing in COVID. That was one of the facts established when we looked at pandemic preparedness. You only right now have a travel ban on 8 countries in Southern Africa. The rest of the world is still traveling in. Omicron is already here. So if it's a question of fairness, it's either all countries get banned or lift the ban. And you have scientists in South Africa saying this is discriminatory.
Well, again, Margaret, if you look at this, we're in a very different situation than we were in the beginning of the pandemic when travel restrictions were put in place. And one of the big differences, Margaret, is that we have travel measures, safety measures, that actually are helping reduce the risk. And those include guaranteeing that people get on international flights who are vaccinated and pre-travel testing. Now, we use the time to actually strengthen those travel measures. The CDC announced that it's going to be shortening that window to 24 hours. We use that time to vaccinate millions of more Americans. But listen, the bottom line is these are meant to be temporary measures. Nobody wants them to be on for any longer than they need to be. And that's why we're continuously reevaluating them so that we can get them off as soon as it's appropriate.
Just before I let you go, the World Health Organization has called booster shots a scandal that must stop now, saying they're unfair, unjust, immoral. How do you justify having that as a centerpiece of your policy?
Well, Margaret, I think the data actually is very clear on this question. If you look at the science, you see that you get first 2 shots of your mRNA vaccine, you get 1 dose of your J&J vaccine. They give you strong protection, but then that protection wanes over time. Our job is both to protect people in America and to protect also obviously the world from a global pandemic. But the data is very clear that getting a booster shot increases your protection. And we've got to do both, Margaret, both boost people here and make sure that the rest of the world has vaccines. And that's exactly, in fact, what we're doing. It's why the U.S. has committed more than 1 billion doses. It's why we're investing in strengthening local infrastructure, training healthcare workers around the world, including the African subcontinent, supporting mobile units to get vaccines to where people are, and supporting public education efforts. We will continue to do that, but we've got to do both, Margaret. Protect our population with boosters and make sure the rest of the world can get protected with vaccines as well.
So, yeah, like I said, I think that continues the discussion I was having last week about how travel bans don't work. Maybe they buy you a little time, but Margaret Brennan, I think, did a good job there of pointing out how Trump's travel ban, and it's not even, it's a travel restriction, not a ban, because U.S. citizens can still come in, and they also don't take place immediately. And there might even be travel from third countries, which is like even some people from China came in through Europe after the Trump-China travel ban. So they didn't work for Trump. They don't work for Biden. They're usually a bad idea and discriminatory. And anyway, I talked about that last week. Vivek Murthy is also correct about there's not necessarily a supply problem. I showed some evidence last week about how vaccine hesitancy and problems distributing vaccine to like the rural areas of South Africa are the main barriers to greater vaccination rates, not supply. And they're even like denying supply, as they were saying in that clip. So those are both important follow-ups to what I was talking about last week. And then for the final newsmaker clip, I was telling you this is like the Chris Wallace didn't listen to the answer award of the week or whatever. I don't know why they had this big Space Force interview. This is the interview of General David Thompson, the U.S. Space Force Vice Chief of Space Operation. And it's kind of an interesting question about how do you keep order in space and what constitutes an active war in space. But there's this, remember that whole person, woman, man, camera, TV cognitive test that Trump took? Well, it's like, can you remember 5 things and do you remember number 5 by the time you get to number 1? Well, at one point you're going to see General David Thompson talk about 5 things, and compare number 1 and 5. Just keep numbers 1 and 5 in mind while watching this final Newsmaker clip before I give you the bonus Dash and Sandy clip for today. And Chris Wallace never follows up. Just goes on to his next question over here.
Expected in space. Yeah, I want to pick up on that. If the Space Force is the new sheriff in town, how do you keep law and order in that kind of situation? And what constitutes an act of war in space?
Okay. So the answer, let me start there. The answer to what constitutes an act of war in space is not really clear, I'll say clearly defined or understood, and perhaps there's been less thinking in that than in other areas and other domains. What we are not, though, is we are not the sheriff in town. We are a military force, but we firmly advocate for regulation and conduct and standards of norms of behavior that everybody should follow and that we should follow as well.
And does anyone, the other nations, especially China, especially Russia, do they listen to us in that area?
There are conversations ongoing. They put forward proposals as well, so do we, but things have not proceeded very far in the recent past. We've tried to facilitate it. It's really under the leadership of the Department of State. But recently, the Secretary of Defense outlined what I'll call 5 tenets of responsible behavior that we apply to that everybody else should. Conduct your space operations in a safe manner. Don't generate long-lived debris. Don't create harmful interference. Communicate your intentions and operate safely in the vicinity of others. Those are the kinds of tenets and expertise that we should, or expectations that we should all adhere to, but they aren't commonly accepted or adhered to yet in space.
China is putting up satellites at twice.
So Chris Wallace just moves on, and I don't know, he seemed to stumble. Maybe he didn't get his 5 rules right, but am I right or am I wrong? Is like rule number 5 just like a specific case of rule number 1? It's like rule number 1 is like operate safely in space. Rule number 5, operate safely in space around others. I don't know. Did he could not remember 1 by the time he got to 5, or maybe Chris Wallace? That's why I thought it was like that cognitive test. But anyway, I thought that was the forgot to listen to the answer award because did not notice that number 1 and 5. I don't know. I think somebody made a mistake there. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I'm going to finish up now. I am going to give you a bonus Dash and Sandy clip, or Dash and Sandy or Dandy clip for the fans of my dog Sandy and my cat Dash. Dash continues his somewhat miraculous recovery after 2 weeks of getting antibiotics and steroids. This is now 3 weeks from that, but 2 weeks of going with eating almost nothing except like lapping up some milk a few days during the whole 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks, a week ago, Dash just like started eating again and is like gaining strength, and I mean still pretty thin, still 16 and a half years old, still probably not many weeks or months ahead of him. Who knows, because he's got pancreas disease and he's got kidney disease and heart disease, but he's almost back to normal, jumping up on chairs, jumping up on the bed, going outside, eating every day. So Dash and Sandy clips for the foreseeable future, including this one I recorded yesterday while watching the shows over here. So there you go. I didn't have a lot of Sandy the dog the last couple weeks. You can see Sandy and Dash interacting like they were over to my left here a little earlier, but I didn't have my phone at the time. I apologize for that. But Dash and Sandy clips for the foreseeable future, I guess, and I'll keep doing this show for, well, I guess I'll keep doing it. Oh, now Sandy's whining, doesn't want me to keep doing the show. Well, I'm still enjoying it. I'll be reevaluating in the next several weeks the Monday thing or what to do. But anyway, I will be back next Monday and for probably at least several weeks of Mondays until I tell you otherwise. Actually, next Monday, I'm scheduled for jury duty. This Friday, I call in, and after 5 p.m. I find out whether I'm on call. Most likely, I won't have to go in on Monday. I might not ever have to go in because I'm like on call. But even if I do have to go in, I most likely won't have to go in on Monday. In the unlikely event I do have to go in Monday, I might do the show on Sunday early, or because I'll know by Friday, or I might do it late, like when I get back at like 5 or 6 p.m. my time. So that's a little hiccup you might watch out for next week. The chance of me getting put on a jury, very low. But that would be cool. I wouldn't actually mind being on a jury. I just don't think it's going to happen. But anyway, thank you all for joining me, and I appreciate the Super Chat contributions, the supportive comments, the people who are patrons and PayPal contributors through the links that I put right below this video. They all make me want to, when I'm balancing all the interests as to whether I should keep doing the weekly live stream, all those things help me decide to keep going. So I appreciate that, and I will see you next week. Until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.